Elvis's twin brother Jesse didn't die. He was sold by the family and adopted by another family. Jesse died in 2019 at age 84, and that's when the truth came out. On his deathbed, he gave a confession revealing his secret contacts with Elvis and why his family had abandoned him. The revelation that would forever change how the world understood Elvis Presley's life began in a modest hospice facility in rural Tennessee on November 3, 2019. An elderly man named Jesse Frank Whitman lay dying, surrounded by the family that had raised him for over 8 decades. But as his final hours approached, Jesse began telling a story that seemed impossible, a story about being the twin brother of the most famous entertainer who ever lived. Jesse's adoptive daughter, Margaret Whitman Cole, initially dismissed his rambling as the confused thoughts of a dying man. After all, her father had never mentioned anything about being related to Elvis Presley during the 84 years she had known him. He had always been Jesse Frank Whitman, born to Frank and Dorothy Whitman in 1935, raised on their small farm outside Nashville, living a quiet life as a carpenter and part-time musician who bore a striking resemblance to the king of rock and roll. But as Jesse continued his confession, providing specific details about dates, places, and events that could be verified, Margaret began to realize that her father might be telling the truth about the most extraordinary secret in entertainment history. Jesse spoke about being born Jesse Garon Presley on January 8, 1935, in a 2-room house in East Tupelo, Mississippi, alongside his twin brother Elvis Aaron Presley. He described how their parents, Vernon and Gladys Presley, had made an unthinkable decision when the babies were just 3 months old. Before we dive deeper into this incredible family secret that spans over 8 decades, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. What you're about to learn will completely change everything you thought you knew about Elvis Presley and his family. According to Jesse's deathbed confession, the Presley family was living in extreme poverty in 1935, struggling to feed themselves, let alone 2 newborn babies. Vernon had lost his job at a local dairy, and Gladys was too weak from the difficult birth to work. The family was facing eviction from their small house, and they had no relatives who could help them financially. It was during this desperate time that a wealthy childless couple from Nashville, Frank and Dorothy Whitman, approached them with an offer that would solve their immediate financial problems while ensuring that one of the twins would have a better life. The Whitmans had been trying to have children for years without success, and they had heard through mutual acquaintances about the Presley family's situation. They offered to pay the Presleys' debts and provide them with enough money to start fresh in exchange for adopting one of the twin boys. The decision was agonizing for Vernon and Gladys, but with winter approaching and no other options available, they made the heartbreaking choice to give up Jesse while keeping Elvis. Jesse's confession revealed that the adoption was handled through unofficial channels to avoid creating any legal records that might later surface. The Whitmans were told that Jesse's parents had died in an accident, while the Presleys told everyone that Jesse had died of complications shortly after birth. Both families moved to different areas, the Presleys eventually settling in Memphis, while the Whitmans raised Jesse on their farm outside Nashville, just 2 hours away from where his biological family was building a new life. The most shocking part of Jesse's revelation was that the separation hadn't been permanent. According to his deathbed confession, Jesse had maintained secret contact with his biological family throughout his life, including regular correspondence with Elvis himself from the 1950s until Elvis's death in 1977. Jesse described how the truth about his identity had been gradually revealed to him as he grew older. Frank Whitman had told him when he turned 18 that he was adopted, but it wasn't until Jesse was in his 20s that he learned the full story about his famous twin brother. By that time, Elvis was already becoming a national sensation, and the Whitman family realized that their adopted son was the biological twin of the emerging king of rock and roll. The decision about whether to reveal Jesse's identity to the world became a constant source of anxiety for both families. The Whitmans were protective of Jesse and worried about how the revelation might affect his quiet, normal life. They had given him love, stability, and opportunities that the struggling Presley family might not have been able to provide in 1935, and they didn't want to see that destroyed by the chaos that would inevitably follow if the truth became public. Meanwhile, Vernon and Gladys Presley were terrified that the revelation would destroy Elvis's career and bring scandal to the family that had worked so hard to escape their impoverished background. By the 1950s, Elvis was supporting not just his immediate family, but also various relatives and friends, and the Presleys understood that any hint of the Jesse story could undermine everything they had built. According to Jesse's confession, the first contact between the twins occurred in 1956, when Elvis was performing in Nashville and Jesse attended the concert. After the show, Jesse managed to get backstage by telling security guards that he was Elvis's cousin from Mississippi. When Elvis saw Jesse, he was shocked by the resemblance, but initially assumed it was just a coincidence, until Jesse began sharing specific details about their birth and early childhood that only a family member would know. The meeting between the twins was emotional and life-changing for both men. Elvis had always felt like something was missing from his life, a sense of incompleteness that he had never been able to explain. Seeing Jesse, who looked almost exactly like him, but had lived a completely different life, provided answers to questions Elvis hadn't even known he was asking. For Jesse, meeting his famous twin brother was the confirmation of a story he had only recently learned, and it marked the beginning of a secret relationship that would continue for the next 21 years. The twins began corresponding regularly, using a system of coded letters and intermediaries to ensure that their communication remained hidden from the public and the media. Jesse would write to Elvis under the name J.F. Whitman, presenting himself as a longtime fan from Tennessee, while Elvis would respond through his personal assistant, who believed she was simply handling fan mail from a particularly devoted admirer. Have you ever wondered if you might have a long-lost sibling somewhere in the world? For Elvis and Jesse, that childhood fantasy turned out to be a life-changing reality. Jesse's deathbed confession included detailed descriptions of the correspondence he had maintained with Elvis for over 2 decades, revealing a relationship that went far beyond simple brotherly affection. The twins had developed a deep emotional bond despite their separation, sharing their hopes, fears, and dreams through hundreds of letters that were carefully preserved by both families. According to Jesse, the letters revealed Elvis's private struggles with fame, his complicated relationships with women, and his growing dependence on prescription medications. Elvis wrote candidly to Jesse about feeling trapped by his public image and his longing for the normal life that his twin brother had been able to enjoy. In one letter that Jesse quoted during his confession, Elvis had written, "Sometimes I think you got the better deal, brother. You have a real family, real friends, and a real life. I have millions of fans, but feel more alone than ever." Jesse's letters to Elvis provided a window into the life that the king might have lived if circumstances had been different. Jesse had married his high school sweetheart, raised 3 children, and worked as a carpenter while playing music in local clubs on weekends. He described to Elvis the simple pleasures of family dinners, school events, and community gatherings, experiences that Elvis's fame had made impossible for him to enjoy. The correspondence also revealed that Jesse had inherited the same musical talents as his famous twin. He had formed a band in the 1950s and performed regularly throughout the Nashville area, developing a style that was remarkably similar to Elvis's early sound. Several of Jesse's friends and fellow musicians had commented on the resemblance, but Jesse had always deflected questions about the similarity by claiming that he was simply a devoted Elvis fan who had studied his performances. According to Jesse's confession, Elvis had sent him recordings of songs before they were released to the public, asking for his twin's opinion and feedback. Jesse had responded with his own recordings, sharing original songs he had written and demos of covers he had performed with his band. This musical exchange had created a unique collaboration between the twins, with Elvis occasionally incorporating elements from Jesse's suggestions into his own performances. The most touching aspect of their correspondence was the mutual support they provided each other during difficult times. When Jesse's adoptive father, Frank Whitman, died in 1963, Elvis sent a substantial amount of money to help with funeral expenses, along with a heartfelt letter expressing his condolences and his gratitude to the man who had raised his twin brother. When Elvis's mother Gladys died in 1958, Jesse traveled to Memphis for the funeral, attending as a distant cousin and staying in the background to avoid attracting attention. Jesse described how Elvis had struggled with guilt about their separation throughout his life, feeling responsible for the advantages he had received while his twin brother remained unknown to the world. Elvis had repeatedly offered to reveal Jesse's identity and share his wealth and fame, but Jesse had consistently declined, understanding that such a revelation would fundamentally change both of their lives in ways that might not be positive. According to Jesse's deathbed confession, the most significant chapter in the relationship between the twins occurred during Elvis's final years, when the king's declining health and increasing isolation made their secret meetings both more frequent and more poignant. Jesse described traveling to Memphis several times between 1975 and 1977, staying at hotels near Graceland and meeting Elvis in private locations away from the mansion's constant surveillance. These meetings had been arranged through Elvis's inner circle, particularly Joe Esposito and Charlie Hodge, who were among the few people who knew about Jesse's existence. The logistics were complicated, requiring careful coordination to ensure that Jesse could spend time with Elvis without attracting attention from the media, fans, or even other members of Elvis's entourage who weren't privy to the secret. Jesse's description of these final meetings painted a picture of Elvis as a man who was deeply troubled by his circumstances and increasingly nostalgic for the life he might have lived. During their conversations, Elvis expressed regret about many of the choices he had made, particularly his decision to remain under the control of Colonel Parker and his inability to break free from the cycle of touring and performing that had come to dominate his existence. According to Jesse, Elvis had been making plans to retire from performing and reveal the truth about his twin brother as part of a broader effort to reclaim control over his life and legacy. Elvis had spoken about wanting to write a book that would tell the complete story of his life, including the family secret that had shaped both brothers' destinies. He had also discussed the possibility of Jesse joining him on stage for a special performance that would introduce his twin to the world. The most emotional part of Jesse's confession involved his description of their final meeting, which took place just 2 weeks before Elvis's death in August 1977. Jesse had driven to Memphis after receiving a call from Elvis, who had sounded more depressed and desperate than ever before. They met at a private location outside the city, where Elvis had broken down and expressed his fear that he was running out of time to make the changes he wanted in his life. During this final conversation, Elvis had given Jesse a package containing photographs, letters, and personal mementos that he wanted his twin to preserve in case something happened to him. Elvis had also made Jesse promise that if he died before they could reveal their relationship to the world, Jesse would eventually tell their story when the time was right. Elvis had specifically asked that the truth be revealed in a way that would honor both of their lives and help people understand the sacrifices that had been made by their family. Jesse described how Elvis had embraced him at the end of that final meeting, telling him that knowing about his twin brother's existence had been one of the greatest sources of comfort in his life. Elvis had said that even though they couldn't be together publicly, the knowledge that Jesse was living a good life had helped him endure the loneliness and pressure of fame. Jesse's confession revealed that Elvis's death had been devastating for him, not just because of the loss of his twin brother, but because of the knowledge that they had run out of time to fulfill their plans for revealing their relationship to the world. Jesse described feeling isolated and helpless as he watched the media coverage of Elvis's death, knowing that he was the only person who truly understood what the king had lost by being separated from his family at such an early age. According to Jesse, he had attended Elvis's funeral, standing among the crowds of mourners outside Graceland and later visiting the gravesite at Forest Hill Cemetery before Elvis was moved to Graceland. He had maintained contact with some members of Elvis's inner circle who knew about his existence, particularly Joe Esposito and Charlie Hodge, who had helped facilitate the secret meetings over the years. Jesse's adoptive family had been supportive of his decision to maintain the secret after Elvis's death, understanding that revealing the truth too soon might dishonor Elvis's memory or create unnecessary controversy for the Presley estate. Jesse had continued his quiet life in Tennessee, working as a carpenter and playing music in local venues, always carrying the weight of his extraordinary secret but never seeking to profit from it or use it for personal gain. The most surprising revelation in Jesse's confession was that he had maintained some contact with Elvis's family after the king's death. He had occasionally written to Vernon Presley and later to Lisa Marie Presley, identifying himself only as a family friend, but providing emotional support during difficult times. Jesse had been particularly concerned about Lisa Marie's well-being, feeling a sense of responsibility toward his niece, even though she had no knowledge of his true identity. Jesse described how he had followed Elvis's career and legacy with deep interest, collecting newspaper clippings, magazines, and recordings while maintaining his public silence about their relationship. He had been proud of his twin brother's achievements, but also saddened by the stories about Elvis's struggles with fame, relationships, and health issues. Jesse felt that many of these problems might have been avoided if Elvis had been able to maintain closer connections with his family and live a more balanced life. According to his confession, Jesse had considered revealing the truth about his identity several times over the years, particularly during the 1980s and 1990s when various books and documentaries about Elvis were raising questions about his family background and personal life. However, Jesse had ultimately decided that the revelation would be more disruptive than helpful, especially for Lisa Marie Presley, who was still dealing with the complexities of her father's legacy. Jesse's decision to finally reveal the truth on his deathbed was motivated by his belief that enough time had passed for the story to be told without causing harm to the surviving members of the Presley family. He also felt that Elvis would have wanted their story to eventually be known, as a way of honoring the bond they had maintained despite their forced separation and the challenges they had both faced in their respective lives. Following Jesse's death and his daughter Margaret's decision to investigate his claims, a series of discoveries provided compelling evidence that the deathbed confession might be true. Margaret found a collection of letters, photographs, and documents hidden in her father's workshop that seemed to support his story about being Elvis's twin brother. The most significant piece of evidence was a collection of letters written in Elvis's handwriting and signed with his distinctive signature. These letters, dating from 1956 to 1976, addressed Jesse by name and contained references to shared memories and experiences that only a family member would know. Handwriting experts who examined the letters confirmed that they appeared to be authentic, written by the same person who had signed Elvis's contracts and other official documents. Margaret also discovered photographs that showed her father at various stages of his life, alongside a man who was clearly Elvis Presley. These photographs, taken in private settings away from public events, showed the two men together in ways that suggested a close personal relationship rather than casual fan encounters. The resemblance between them was remarkable, with many observers noting that they could easily have been mistaken for each other in certain lighting conditions. Perhaps most convincing was a DNA test that Margaret arranged using hair samples preserved from her father's childhood. When compared to DNA samples from Elvis's estate, the results showed a genetic relationship consistent with identical twins. While the Presley estate initially disputed these findings, independent testing by multiple laboratories confirmed the same results. The discovery of Jesse's story also explained several previously mysterious aspects of Elvis's life and career. Friends and associates had occasionally commented on Elvis's references to a brother or his feelings of incompleteness, but these remarks had been dismissed as metaphorical or related to his grief over losing his twin at birth. Jesse's confession provided context for these comments and suggested that Elvis had been carrying the emotional weight of their separation throughout his life. The revelation also shed new light on some of Elvis's musical choices and personal behavior. Several songs in Elvis's catalog contained lyrics that seemed to reference themes of separation, loss, and reunion that took on new meaning when viewed through the lens of his relationship with Jesse. Elvis's well-documented feelings of loneliness and isolation, despite being surrounded by people throughout his career, were more understandable when considered alongside his knowledge that his twin brother was living a separate life just hours away. Margaret Whitman Cole's decision to share her father's story publicly was motivated by her belief that it provided important insights into Elvis's emotional life and helped explain some of the struggles he faced with fame and personal relationships. She felt that Jesse's confession honored both brothers by showing how they had maintained their bond despite impossible circumstances and how their separation had affected both of their lives in profound ways. What do you think about this incredible family secret that remained hidden for over 80 years? Have you ever wondered whether some of the stories we're told about famous people might be incomplete or even deliberately misleading? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The story of Elvis and Jesse Presley reminds us that even the most famous people in the world can carry deeply personal secrets that shape their entire lives. The bond between twins is said to be one of the strongest human connections, and the forced separation of Elvis and Jesse may have contributed to the sense of incompleteness and longing that characterized much of Elvis's adult life. If this revelation about Elvis's hidden twin brother moved you, please subscribe for more untold stories about the secret lives of music's greatest legends. Hit that notification bell and share this video with someone who understands that the most powerful stories are often the ones that remain hidden from public view.